One of the things that the anniversary brings up is the same season, and perhaps there'll be wind and storms, and that brings up one of the fundamental experiences that comes out of any disaster, and that's the element of trauma. Now, we bandy the word around a lot now. It's good that we use it a lot, but it's often used in a really to mean anything that's very upsetting. It's not actually what a trauma is. The word trauma really means wound or injury or damage. So psychological trauma is damage to our psychological system. And the way that forms is it's damage to the way we experience the world or ourselves or nature or other people, because something happens that shatters an assumption I had before that gave me my sense of safety and security in the world. So in the case of this storm, the wind blows and the rain falls regularly, and the garden grows and maybe a few branches get blown down, but there's no connection between wind and I might die. And then on one occasion there's a terrible storm, trees fall down, and I might find myself thinking, goodness me, if one of those falls on me, I'll die. And that shatters the assumptions I had about trees, nature, wind, house, that I'd never questioned before. Now, the problem with an assumption is that it's assumed. We don't know what we assume. They just become the framework for our sense of normality and security and safety. We walk amongst trees, we don't give them a second thought, we smell the aroma and we look how beautiful they are, and that's it. The thought that they might be life-threatening never occurs. We've only got to have one happen and it shatters our assumption. So the trauma is the damage to my sense of the world as I lived in it and felt comfortable and secure in it. And that's why a very important factor in trauma is anxiety. I feel afraid, I feel unsafe, I feel alarmed and on edge, and I can't relax. Now, what we know is that people who experience a trauma, if they're not careful, will carry away with them the imprint of the trauma and continue to feel threatened every time, say, the wind blows or trees sway. And it's very clear why this happens. It's because when we're in this state, we go through the original dangerous event and we feel maybe our lives are in serious danger or the lives of our loved ones. And that places us in what we call a state of heightened arousal, state of really being on edge, in adrenaline mode. And when we're in that state, it's as though our nervous system is absolutely opened up and focused on one thing only, and that's survival. And we have very intense impressions of sight and sound, and all of the experiences around just become so intense because our life might depend on whether this sound means danger or that sound means safety. And so we learn in a different way. We learn like an animal learns, just by association. You know, you whistle your dog and you give them a little piece of meat every time they come, and they will always come to the whistle because they've learned to associate the two. And if you don't give them the meat, they still have a really great expectation. And this is a very primitive learning. You can do this with earthworms even. Psychologists who don't have other better things to do have learned to condition earthworms. But that learning means we actually connect all sorts of aspects of what was going on at the time with the great danger, the tree falling, being injured, being damaged, not knowing what's happening to loved ones. Now, if we then come into a quiet time, summertime, different season, no great winds, it doesn't take that away. Those connections have been made in the nervous system between wind, threat, danger, or cold weather, or particular, or the colour of the falling leaves, or what it feels like, or it could be any different aspect of our experience that was associated with that time has become connected with the horror and the fear. Now we call that a trigger, because when all of those other experiences reappear, the seasonal, where the sun is, what the weather feels like, even if it's not strong wind, but it might be strong wind, particular sound of the wind, and suddenly you'll find that it reactivates the other part of the experience, which is the sense of threat and danger. Now, the people routinely discover, as they move into the same season, a whole series of triggers they didn't expect. And the triggers are not reasonable, they just feel the same. I often quote the example of the woman I heard about who, after Black Saturday, she had a very bad fire experience. She was driving down through the Christmas Hills to Yarra Glen, and she came around a corner in the middle of winter and hit a fog bank, and the fog felt like smoke because it's the same colour, and she said she had to pull over on the side of the road and do a bit of deep breathing to start to manage her panic. She was hyperventilating, and just the smoke, suddenly I wasn't prepared. If someone had told her, "Oh, be careful, there's a bit of fog on the road," then she would have come around and said, "Yeah, that's the fog." But because it was suddenly there, you just got this grey, dangerous stuff evoked this sense of I'm in terrible danger. And now this is what we call a traumatic reaction. And what we have to do is we have to re-establish assumptions of safety and security. Now the way they were formed in the first place is by repeated experiences of things being as they are and being safe. Then you have one experience that shatters that. Now the recovery is to rebuild a new set of assumptions which says it's okay, they're always safe, except sometimes I know they're dangerous. The trauma learning will say your life is in danger every time the wind blows. And that's post-traumatic stress. And that doesn't help you recover, it leads you to avoid, to go and live in a unit in South Bank. But then you might decide to do that, but then you probably lost your love of the country or whatever made you live there. And it's really important to sort of allow time to rebuild your assumptions and your sense of safety. It'll never be quite as simple or naive as it was before, but it can be safe. And so anything you can do to notice the triggers, and then you need to bring, instead of the dog learning, grey stuff, danger, panic, you actually have to put a loop to go through your thinking brain, which is grey stuff, winter, can't be smoke, must be fog, it's okay. And every time we make that more complicated link, we start to break down that simple connection, the short circuit, if you like, the short circuit. So that means I think it's very important that in a natural disaster people actually learn to be perhaps more interested in the weather map and the weather forecast, and there's all these apps now, aren't there? And to actually find out about the conditions that led to that storm, and what was Bureau of Meteorology actually saying at the time. Probably if we were in our ordinary assumptions, we weren't listening. And now we've got to listen, and we've got to realise, oh, this is a dangerous storm. And then we'll think, okay, well, how will I deal with that? So hopefully people have also done a whole lot of other things, like making their houses safer. Maybe removing dangerous trees, or making sure they're checked, and an arborist says, no, this one's not going to blow over, it's very secure. And you have the confidence. Anything that brings knowledge and information in to break up these simple, hardwired patterns that were created by that one situation on the day. Now, I think it takes a few years to rebuild your sense of confidence in the environment, the nature. And as we go into the anniversary and the repeat of the seasons, we've got to say, I've got to actively engage with this. I've got to think about what's happening. I've got to get knowledge and information and keep telling myself, I've done a lot to my garden and my environment. I'm not as vulnerable as I was before. Or I've got a plan. I know what I'm going to do if there's a bad storm. And I know how I will survive. And all of this gives you confidence. It allows you to go through a few more seasons with nothing bad happening, and then slowly your sense of reality starts to return. One thing that happens that's very useful here is that people talk. And I want to say just a bit about the value of talking about things as a way of recovering from bad experiences. Now, I'm not talking about seeing a counsellor or a professional person. I'm talking about just sharing your experiences with other people. If we go back to the very disturbing experiences on the night, you weren't talking about them at the time, you were in them. And they're stored as strong experiences and memories of feelings and so on that get easily reactivated. What we know is that as soon as we try to describe, that's all, just describe those experiences, what the sound of the wind was, where it came from, what I did, what I thought was going to happen, what did happen, and so on, and why it happened, why I survived. All of those details, when we put them into words, allow us to put them all together, because the trauma memories are really little fragments of the worst moments. And you can hear what people have got in their mind when they talk to you, because they'll usually, if they describe those traumatic moments, they'll leap from one moment to another, from one danger, from one horrible thing to another. And you'll often have the feeling, I can't quite follow it, but I'm seeing how terrible it was. Now, I think there's something that we can all do with each other, and family and friends outside the area can do to help those who went through the experience. And that is just try to listen for as clear and full and understandable a description of the event as possible. And where something's missing in your mind, it must be because they haven't put it in. How do we get to here? Is this before or after? I'm feeling confused. Then if you simply join the conversation, say, well, hang on a second, I don't quite follow this, can you explain that? What was happening in between? How did you get to there? Any of those questions, make them go back and bring up the neglected bits of their experience, so that gradually they form a whole picture of the experience. Now, there's a very important purpose for that. That if we just go back to the terrible moments and we describe those, usually the emotion comes up again. And what you'll get is that person describes a terribly dangerous moment, just to make something up. The noise was unbelievable. I heard these terrible cracks, and then I heard the crack of the tree next to the house, and I knew it was coming down, and I thought, this is it. Now, you'll often find that they break the story there and they start to talk about how frightened they were and how they felt about it and what they thought. And that will often lead to maybe what the damage really means and how hard life is and all the things they lost. But it doesn't actually answer the question, what's going to happen to me? And if you listen when the person says, I thought this was it was curtains for me, and then you've got to ask, do they have in the story how they survived? And they very often don't. They often lead to all sorts of other emotional problems. So that really shows you that whenever something triggers them, they go back to that terrible moment and they never remember why they survived. And what's very helpful in the trauma is to put the whole story again together so that when something triggers it, they go right through to the survival. And the reason is this, that the memories of the threat sit in one part of my brain which is really dealing with all the great danger, and the memory of how I survived is all about calming down and getting over it, and they go into a different loop, if you like, in the brain. And we have to put that all together so that my survival reassures the danger. Otherwise I'll oscillate. Sometimes I feel in danger and frightened and it's all like it was on the day, and other times I'm feeling okay. And so as people talk to each other and they take interest in each other and want to just understand, it helps them move out of those little loops of the danger. So the sort of question you can ask if a person breaks the narrative and goes off on a tangent about, I don't know, Delp should have cut those trees down on my boundary, or my husband planted those trees 40 years ago and I told him he should never have done it and it's all his fault, or whatever, you know, then that doesn't actually change it, because the question we can ask is, well, where did the tree actually fall? It fell on the carport. Why was that? Well, that's where it reached. Oh, so you thought it was going to fall on the bedroom, but it didn't reach that far. Or the wind wasn't blowing in the right direction, or whatever the circumstances were. So that what they remember is the sound of the tree falling that I thought meant I was going to die was wrong. It's not what was going to happen. And I've got to hold the whole story to actually say it was very frightening, but I was okay on that occasion. And then if the person says, but it could have, then you say, okay, let's now get into disaster planning for next storm. But it's not what happened that day. And we can only come to grips with what actually happened. As soon as we're in what might have happened, we're in our imagination and anything can happen. The plane could fall on the house, couldn't it? The anniversary is going to bring up a lot of opportunities, and I think it's very helpful for people to talk, not so much about how they feel, or we need to talk about that, but the base of the whole process, get the story complete. Why did everything happen the way it did, and can I remember why I survived, and all the good things that happened afterwards as well as the problems.